Christmas movies are a staple of the holiday season. You just can't go a Christmas without watching Home Alone, or A Christmas Vacation, or even Elf. But there is one Christmas movie that tends to divide people. One that creeps people the hell out. But one that truly embodies Christmas magic.
This is the Polar Express!
The Polar Express is a cult Christmas classic. Based on the 1985 children's book by Chris Van Allsburg, the film stars Tom Hanks and is directed by the legendary Robert Zemeckis. The film is quite unique, as it was the first movie to fully utilize motion capture animation, a method of filmmaking that was still very new when this movie came out. I was born in May of 2004, 6 months before this movie came out. I obviously didn't see it in theaters when it was released, but it still holds a very special place in my heart. I remember reading the book a lot growing up, and when my parents brought home the DVD, I was electrified. I honestly think I've seen this movie over 100 times. In fact, we've gone through 3 different DVDs because they kept getting scratched. Every single line of dialogue and music cue is etched into my brain, and whenever I think of this movie, there's a certain shade of blue and yellow that comes to mind. The film is 20 years old today, but it's gained this reputation of being creepy. But is the movie really that bad? Have these 20 years been kind to it? Well, let's jump into our pajamas, grab some hot chocolate, and hop into our DeLorean, because we're heading back to 1999. Tom Hanks had made a real name for himself in the 90s. By 1998, he had titles such as Saving Private Ryan, Forrest Gump, and Apollo 13 under his belt. Hanks had 4 kids and would read them many books, including The Polar Express. With hopes to play both the conductor and Santa, he acquired the film rights to the book in 1999. Chris Van Allsburg was reluctant to sell the rights to the book, but after learning that Hanks wanted them, he quickly changed his mind. Robert Zemeckis was signed on as director in 2002, who had previously worked with Hanks on Forrest Gump and Castaway. Van Allsburg made it very clear in his deal that he did not want the film to be conventionally animated, as he felt that it would not do his characters or story justice. Zemeckis agreed, but felt that if they were to go down the live-action route, the film would cost $1 billion instead of $160 million. They eventually landed on utilizing motion capture technology, which at the time was only used for one or very few characters in live action. There had never been a full-length motion capture film before this, but Robert Zemeckis is a man who takes many risks, so he took it upon himself to make history. Initially, Hanks was considered to do the motion capture for every single character in the film, but Zemeckis noticed that Hanks was getting very exhausted, so his role was cut down to only 5: the hero boy, who would later be voiced by Daryl Sabara, the hero boy's dad, the conductor, the hobo, and Santa. Having Hanks do the motion capture for every character is a novel idea in theory, but there's no doubt that he would get exhausted doing every part. Even playing 5 parts, I'm sure he got a nice check for this movie. The film was released in November of 2004 and was the first full-length animated film to be shown in 3D IMAX. It opened second after The Incredibles and would go on to make $318 million and be nominated for Best Sound Editing, Mixing, and Original Song at the 77th Academy Awards. While it didn't make a crazy big impact at the time, it has since become a cult Christmas classic, and there's not a year that goes by where I don't watch this film. In fact, my local theater chain shows this movie every year, and I've had the honor to see it on the big screen twice now. To this day, it's so surreal to see this movie that I've watched on DVD my whole life on the big screen. While I am incredibly nostalgic for this film, I'm going to take off the rose-tinted glasses and look at this from a more serious perspective. Before I talk about the story, let's address the elephant in the room. This was the first fully motion capture animated film ever. I have a feeling many of you are unfamiliar with this process, so allow me to run through it. Instead of wearing costumes on a pre-built set, actors wear suits that have internal sensors in them which track their movements on a soundstage with no set dressing and only consisting of a few aspects that they need to interact with. They also have markers placed on their face to capture facial movements. All of their movements are transmitted to a computer, and the general shape of the characters is constructed. After the performances are finished, the visual directing comes into play. The set has already been built virtually, so when the characters are placed in, the camera operator can move the camera anywhere they want. While this is happening, the character models aren't fully rendered, because it's a lot easier for the computers to render the movements of the camera when there isn't a lot of detail in the shot. This phase is known as the Michelin Man stage, and it can be quite disturbing. Seriously, this is giving me flashbacks to Food Fight. After the blocking and layout has been completed, the character models are given hair and wardrobe, and the fine details of the set are placed in, followed by lighting and effects. That was a lot to take in, but how does the animation itself look? Personally, I think it holds up pretty well, for the most part. The three main kids, the conductor, the hobo, Smokey and Steamer, and Santa are all very well detailed and have very clear and unique facial movements. Where the human animation falls flat for me is everyone else. The other kids on the train can be a bit off from time to time, as are the hero boy's parents. Look, their mouths aren't even animated here. Oh, it looks so weird. But the real sin comes from the elves. Seriously, these creatures are just off-putting. But I don't necessarily blame the movie. There are thousands of elves here, and they're not the most important characters, so I don't expect all of them to look great. They're just here to build the world of the North Pole, which they succeed in doing. Where they fell flat with the human animation, they absolutely made up for in every other aspect. The world this movie takes place in is gorgeously animated and detailed. The train has so many little intricate details like pipes and rivets, both in the cab and outside. The North Pole looks exactly what I imagined it to look like as a kid. This huge city where millions of toys are made, filled with elves. In terms of world building, this movie absolutely succeeds and everything looks great. Of all the mediums Zemeckis could have used to tell this story, I feel like this was the best choice. It looks real, but we're able to get so much more dynamic shots and sets while keeping true to the art style of the book that a live-action film just couldn't pull off. And, thanks to this movie and the advancements in technology, motion capture, and CGI as a whole was able to evolve and look so much more realistic. Regardless of how creepy some of the humans may look, I do appreciate how Zemeckis had the balls to make this film. Someone has to start utilizing the full potential of this technology, and it'll get better. And for being 20 years old, I think the crew did a very solid job, and I think they definitely did the book justice. I'm sure you've all seen this movie, but allow me to briefly summarize it. The Polar Express follows a young boy who is beginning to doubt his belief in Santa, and he embarks on a journey aboard a magical train to the North Pole to restore his faith. Before I go any further into the film, I want to bring up an interesting point. The main character has no name. When I watched this film as a youngster, I always wondered why he never had a name. The credits list him as Hero Boy, and I always thought that was lame. As any 5-year-old would do, I asked my mom what his name was, and she said Chris. I can only assume she came up with this name as the author of the book is also named Chris. Van Allsburg did base the book loosely on memories he had as a kid, and Tom Hanks did confirm in an interview that his name is Chris.
For some reason, I was always able to remember that the little Chris was wearing a bathrobe that came undone.
So for the sake of this video, I'm going to be referring to this boy as Chris. Let's start by talking about the good stuff in the movie, because there is far more good than bad here. The story moves at a very good pace and wastes no time at all in throwing us right into the main conflict. It has little to no filler, and regardless of how silly some of the scenes may be, they all tie back to the theme of belief. I love how much Zemeckis and his cinematographers utilize the medium they're working in. There are several shots where the camera goes through very small openings and follows objects in a way that would not be possible with live action. I particularly love this long wander as we follow the ticket making its way through the wilderness. You can definitely tell they were having fun with the shot design. I really appreciate how the train was shot. Trains are these very big and imposing figures, and Zemeckis uses a lot of very low and close shots to give the engine a sense of scale and weight. The sound design perfectly complements this. This big metal beast feels so alive through the sounds the Foley artist recorded. The rest of the sound design is very good too. I really like the sound for the scenes that take place on top of the train and while on the ice. While those scenes are definitely nonsensical, they're made to feel real. I'm going to be beating a dead horse when I say this, but musically, the film triumphs. Alan Silvestri proves once again that he is a master composer and truly captures the sense of Christmas magic through the score. All of the songs are good too. They each have a distinct tone, and I often find myself humming them back. I really like the main Polar Express song, and Hot Chocolate is this really fun, upbeat tune. And of course, you can't mention the Polar Express without talking about Believe. There's a reason it's a classic Christmas song. It's so beautiful and majestic, and it perfectly sums up the tone of the movie. I mentioned earlier how I thought it was a bizarre choice to have Tom Hanks play so many characters, but I think it actually works in universe. This movie is a dream, and dreams are formed by different aspects and memories from our lives. The first person that floats around the idea of belief is Chris's dad, who's played by Tom Hanks, and is also the last person Chris hears talking before he goes to sleep. Perhaps he sees his dad in all the prominent male roles in this movie, and that's why all three of these characters are voiced by Tom Hanks. I have no way to check if this is true or not, but I like to think of it as a nice headcanon. There are a few small aspects of the film I didn't notice until my latest rewatch. For one, the snowflakes are actual little snowflakes and not just white dots. It's so much easier to pass off dots as snowflakes, but the team went to the extra effort to make this aspect more realistic, which is very commendable. I like how the light on the train is flickering before Smokey and Steamer go to change it, showing that it actually did have to be changed. The number of the train is also a cool little Easter egg. The basis of the Polar Express, the Pierre Marquette's real number is 1225, which just so happens to be the same day as Christmas. Van Allsburg has gone on record saying that this is partially why he chose this engine as the basis, and I like that. Why the number appears on this tunnel is beyond me. Does the Polar Express have his own tunnel? Did he not want to get his paint wet in the rain? While all of these aspects make for a great film, the thing that makes this film so special, in my opinion, is how closely it stays to the spirit of the book. So many movies based on classic children's books totally miss the point of the book and what made them so special. That's not the case here. It's so clear to me that Tom Hanks and Robert Zemeckis loved this book and knew just how much families around the world loved it. If they fucked it up, everyone, including Chris Van Allsburg, would hate them. The message of belief is present throughout the entirety of the film, and it's not bogged down by stupid pop culture references or cringy jokes. This is reinforced by several shots in the movie that are one-to-one recreations of illustrations from the book. You can really tell that the people making this film wanted to make something special, and boy did they succeed. This movie is not without sin, however. There are several different nitpicky things I'd like to point out. For one, I just cannot stand the changing number of coaches. For most of the film, the train is pulling 5, but in various shots, it's seen pulling upwards of 19. The number is also inconsistent when Chris and the hobo are skiing to the engine. This has confused me and pissed me off ever since I was a kid, and I can't for the life of me understand how no one working on the film noticed this and said, hey, that's wrong. How is Billy not able to keep up with the train here? It's not moving that quickly. I mean, Chris was able to hop onto it while it was moving, why can't Billy? Can he not run? Brother, you're gonna need to know how to run in your adult life. You should take some running lessons. I find it almost too convenient that Steamer just so happens to have a hairpin that fits perfectly into this hole. While I complimented how the train was shot earlier, and I do still really like the render, the way it's animated going around the mountain is so off-putting. It just curls up like a snake. That's not what a train looks like going around tight corners. And finally, how did the nerd get into the bag of toys? When Holly and Chris go back for Billy, he watches them, implying that he's gonna follow them, but we never see him following them, nor do we see him in or on the runaway coach. And for that matter, how did he get into the bag of presents before them? Wasn't he like suffocating under those presents? Oh, it doesn't make any sense. These are admittedly small nitpicks that don't necessarily affect the movie as a whole. But there is one thing in the movie that absolutely pisses me off, and it nearly wrecks it for me. It's the entire 20-minute stretch of the film from the conductor bringing Holly on top of the train to them making it off the ice. This part of the movie it's just ridiculous. Not only are the things that happen nonsensical, but lives are put in danger. The conductor brings a child on top of a train during a snowstorm and keeps 2 children on front of the train when the train is going at Mach 10 speed down a goddamn roller coaster. Why didn't they just, I don't know, walk through the coaches and go back into the cab? They walked through the coaches on the way back, why not on the way up there? The only reason I could find for them going on top of the train was for Chris to meet the hobo ghost. But he could have, like, met him in the puppet car or something, or maybe Chris was going to use the bathroom and he comes across this guy. Yeah, the scenes on top of the train are cool action-wise, but they totally take away from the integrity of the book and already established plot of the film. And if you thought that was bad, just you wait. After they fly down the roller coaster, the train barrels onto a frozen lake where the ice has supposedly frozen over the tracks. Whoever thought it would be a smart idea to not build a goddamn bridge over the lake, I'd like to have a word with. But that doesn't break the ice. You know what does? A goddamn cotter pin. The pin that secures the throttle handle to the train snaps off and Smokey swallows it. Steamer hits it out of him and it goes flying out and lands perfectly on the ice for it to start cracking. So if you ever wanted to cause massive amounts of inconvenience and break a frozen lake, don't bother using your 670 million pound steam engine and 5 coaches loaded with passengers. Nah, just go down to Home Depot and buy a cotter pin for $7. I want to talk more about Smokey and Steamer, as well as a deleted scene. The scene of them fixing the light went through a couple changes. Originally, when Chris blew the whistle, it was going to cause a problem with the steam pressure, and Holly was going to have a hard time trying to fix it. It's implied that the train was gonna blow up just by blowing the whistle, but Smokey and Steamer come in and fix it. They then sing a very childish song and have a whole sing and dance in the cab. Not only does it slow down the pacing of the scene, but it's really cringy and it's way too comical. The movie already has some comical elements, but this would have totally ruined the tone of the movie. There was also a deleted scene where they explained the hobo's backstory to Chris and Holly. While it's animated very well, I'm glad it was cut out. It takes away from the mysterious element of the hobo. Without the scene, the hobo feels much stranger and leaves it up to the audience to decide what his deal is. I can only assume that these scenes were studio mandated. Someone at Warner Brothers probably thought that there wasn't enough action or substance in the story and demanded these scenes be added. Though they are nonsensical and stupid, Zemeckis, for the most part, tried his best to make them thematically interesting, which is commendable. In fact, he makes this roller coaster scene somewhat grounded by not showing a shot of the train. He only utilizes POV shots, medium shots from the front of the train, and a few shots in the cab. If he were to show a wide shot of the train going down the roller coaster, that would have totally wrecked all immersion. He does a similar thing in Castaway. During the plane crash, he never cuts to the outside of the plane, and by doing that, it feels more realistic and we can really focus on the severity of the situation and the emotions of the characters more. While I don't like these aspects of the film, I'm able to look past them, as the theme of belief is still very prevalent throughout them, and these scenes are definitely not boring, so at least they have something going for them. At the beginning of the video, I posed this question: does the movie hold up 20 years later? Despite all of the poor aspects I just mentioned, I can't say this movie is bad. That would be a total lie, and my childhood self would kill me. As I stated earlier, the people who made this movie knew how special the book was and didn't want to tarnish it or Chris Van Allsburg's legacy. This is one of the rare movies based on a kid's book that actually keeps the spirit of the book present throughout the entire runtime. Look at all the Dr. Seuss movies. I want you to sit here with a straight face and tell me that these movies are worthy of the Dr. Seuss name. How can you associate some of the greatest children's books of all time with shit like this? But I can wholeheartedly say that I think this movie is great and definitely holds up 20 years later. I think people are going to be watching this movie for the rest of time. Earlier this year, one of the producers of the film announced that a sequel is in the early stages of development. But I don't think I want one. I'm positive that the animation will be heavily improved, but I have no idea where they could take the story. If it actually happens, I'll check it out. But if not, I'm happy to call this one of my favorite Christmas movies, and I'll watch it every single year during the holiday season.